New information tonight on this haunting scene. A plane spinning slowly as it drops from the sky. Crashing in a Brazilian neighborhood near Sao Paulo, leaving behind an inferno of black smoke towering over the homes the plane crashed in front of.
The whole world was horrified when news broke about the Brazilian Vopass airline crash that killed all 62 passengers on board on Friday. Unfortunately, the news just got even worse. Doctors on board the ill-fated flight bound for Sao Paulo's International Airport were convinced they discovered a cure for cancer, and clinical trials were in an advanced stage. Now, with the doctors tragically silenced by unseen forces, clinical trials have been halted, and surviving researchers acknowledge that crucial knowledge was lost with their untimely deaths. Mainstream media are working desperately to censor this information on behalf of Big Pharma, but the evidence is damning, and we need to work together to spread this information as far and wide as possible.
I'm saddened to report this, but it is true that Dr. Rashid Buttar has passed away. He reportedly died on Thursday evening. I've confirmed this now with several people who were close to him, a truth teller, and frankly, a ferocious warrior in the space of health freedom. Although, of course, he was defamed, maliciously maligned by the pharma-controlled establishment media. Why? Why did Dr. Buttar pass at such a young age? Explained that only a few weeks before, he was in the ICU for 6 days with a diagnosis of both stroke and myocarditis, with symptoms and biomarkers consistent with adverse effects from the mRNA jabs, which, of course, he did not take.
When they couldn't suppress the story that way, they actually went after Dr. Mel Bruchet, who was the first to break the story, and police showed up at his door and put him in a psychiatric institution. Now, while in the psychiatric institution, they gave Dr. Mel Bruchet, who's 81 years old, they gave him medications that are known to cause strokes in anyone over the age of 65. This is medical, premeditated murder. Dr. Bruchet managed to escape, but in British Columbia, Canada, if you escape a psychiatric facility without the permission of the director of that facility, then you get a warrant for your recapture.
They have controlled and captured our health agencies. Every single policy that they have issued out of those agencies the entire pandemic has failed, is failing, and will continue to fail. It must stop. Every time. And so I see all of you guys. I am so grateful to see America showing up. That's what we do. We are Americans and we resist tyranny.
Freedom. To let doctors be doctors. The care of patients should not be dictated by the government. My healthcare system banned me from using these drugs.
So in the Federation of State Medical Boards, I think this was the fall of 2021, came out with a very threatening letter to physicians. Basically, we all received this in the mail. If you provide misinformation about the COVID-19 vaccine, you could lose your license that you worked so hard for. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it was a very threatening letter.
Doctors are being blocked from practicing medicine, and it's stunning. Pharmacies won't fill prescriptions for things like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and others if they say that they're being used for COVID as opposed to mites in the case of ivermectin. So pharmacists are blocking physicians' prescriptions. Physicians are being threatened or are being actively investigated to lose their license for prescribing these drugs off-label to patients. And the rules have come down from NIH, which is to say, basically from Tony's brain, Dr. Fauci, that thou shalt not provide early treatment.
Das ist ein Professor von der Universität Almeria, Das ist Professor Dr. Paolo Campa-Madrid. Der hat eben diese Impfstoffe auf Graphenoxid untersucht. Mit Mikroraman-Spektroskopie. Da untersuchst du Schwingungen. Und da gibt es Schwingungsbanden. Diese beiden Schwingungsbanden sind einfach wichtig. Und da sieht man, dass es kein Graphenoxid ist, sondern Graphenhydroxid. Ich möchte euch mal erklären, was dieses Graphenhydroxid tatsächlich ist. Das ist monolagige Aktivkohle. Du hast da diese C6-Ringe. Er hat die in allen Proben gefunden.
Die Polizei ist gerade da. Die Polizei ist gerade da. Ja.
Jetzt?
Mach mal bitte auf. Ja, ich weiß nicht, was los ist.
Das ist doch gerade ein
Ich weiß nicht.
Guck mal, wir haben vorhin über Angst gesprochen.
Moment, hier ist gerade die Polizei, bricht gerade die Tür auf.
Polizei! Ich will die Hände sehen! Auf den Boden, runter, beide! Runter auf den Boden! Geh runter! Zwei Personen hier! Am Boden liegen bleiben! Wie sind Ihre Namen? Wie heißen Sie? Wie heißen Sie?
Ich bin Andreas.
Sonst irgendwelche Messer, Waffen, irgendwas einstecken?
Nein.
Computer aus.
Dr. Seeby, aka Alfred Bowman. He was killed in police custody. He was known for his work on natural cures for cancer, diabetes, and AIDS. We have Dr. John Marshall. He was a practitioner. He was a fourth-generation Marine, and he was accidentally drowned while out for a run. Dr. Rod Floyd apparently committed suicide in his sauna. His wife doesn't believe that.
On June the 19th, 2015, the decomposing corpse of Dr. Jeffrey Bradstreet was found floating in the North Carolina River. His chest bore a single, bloody bullet wound. Days earlier, Bradstreet's office had been mysteriously raided by the U.S. Food and Drugs Administration. The renowned homeopathic researcher was working on a cure for autism. Health journalist Erin Elizabeth believes Bradstreet was murdered by hitmen working for Big Pharma. According to her, this would make him one of 50 practitioners who have been assassinated by pharmaceutical companies in the last 2 years.
Dr. Bradstreet, fatal gunshot wounds to the chest. Dr. Gaynor, found in the woods. His body was ruled a suicide. Dr. Sievers, 2 gunmen. Dr. Holt and Dr. Hindall. Their bodies were discovered and it's still under scrutiny.
Laurie Alton says, it is known that most, if not all, of the doctors who recently died or disappeared were somehow connected to treatment practices involving GCMAF to prevent the negative effects of Nagalase. Many people, including US President Trump, believe corporations are producing drugs that cause autism, especially vaccines. They claim the FDA looks past the damaging side effects of certain drugs because of the huge revenue the industry generates. Fortune writer Laura Lorenzetti has investigated the cozy links between the FDA and Big Pharma. She says pharma is essentially buying fast-track approval for drugs, while FDA officials are keen to approve Big Pharma products because they often get jobs in the private drug sector when they leave public service. Professor Donald W. Light claims 90% of FDA-approved drugs across the last 3 decades are no more effective than those already on the market. As journalist S.D. Wells argues, if this were exposed by alternative doctors, it would have the potential to destroy Big Pharma. Killing the doctors could be the only way to prevent the death of the industry.
Dr. Fitzpatrick's. He was mysteriously disappeared. Mary Bouvier, murdered in her home. The German conference, 20 doctors poisoned and rushed to the hospital. Dr. Pass died of alleged suicide. Dr. Block, alleged suicide. Dr. Vincer, a 3-car crash. Dr. Grossman fell off his balcony while trying to get his keys.
Florida alternative doctor Teresa Sievers was found violently bludgeoned with a hammer in her home. Several news outlets, including NBC, noted the possible connections between her death and those of the other holistic doctors. Around the same time, it was reported that Dr. Patrick Fitzpatrick had disappeared. Days later, his vehicle and trailer were discovered abandoned beside a pea field. He appeared to have vanished without a trace. Reporter Mary Wilder states, "Given the fact that people being murdered for financial gain is a large part of American history, it's not much of a stretch to believe that's what's happened here."
Dr. Grossman, falling off his bike, major head trauma. Dr. Ernstein, attacked and murdered. Dr. Vanette, body was found after her dog had been hit by a car, but her body wasn't found for days later. Dr. Hurley, another bicycle accident. Dr. Mileto and his wife were attacked. He survived, his wife did not. Professor Alan Clark, body found hanging in the woods. Dr. Cheryl DeBoer, a HIV and cancer researcher. She was found in a culvert with a plastic bag wrapped around her head.
Something similar is true of Teresa Sievers. In February 2016, her husband was found guilty of arranging 2 hitmen to carry out her murder. Prosecutors found that the crime scene had been staged to look like a burglary.
Dr. Polge went missing, and her body was found in the ocean. Dr. Rasmussen, body was stabbed 30 times. Satori committed suicide. Dr. Sauer, gunman walked in and killed him. Dr. Hong, murdered. Dr. De Silva was reported missing, and then his body was found.
And that was, since you last spoke to me, we learned about the apparent suicide of Dr. Jeff Bradstreet, and you can educate our listeners now as to who he was and why people, including his family, are asking questions about his death, the anti-vaccine campaigner and Dr. Jeff Bradstreet. So a lot of people asking for your thoughts on him and that story, Rima. What have you got to say on it?
What I have to say is that as of my last update on this topic, it's not just Dr. Jeff Bradstreet. 8 physicians have been assassinated in the United States and Mexico. 3 in Mexico, and they were with 2 of their employees, 2 administrative employees. Their car was riddled with bullets, and the car was found empty. Bodies were presented to the families of those 5 people, including the 3 doctors, and the bodies had no bullet holes and their DNA did not match. And the Mexican government said, oh, well, yeah, right, that's true, but just forget it. In the United States, an additional 6 doctors have been murdered. And I say Dr. Bradstreet was murdered as well. It's fairly hard to commit suicide by firing a rifle at your own chest. It's just kind of awkward. It generally works, but it's not a favored suicide methodology.
It certainly is not.
No, nor is killing yourself with a hammer, as happened to one of the doctors.
Dr. Burt, reported missing, body found in his car sometime later. Dr. Shi, stabbed to death. Dr. Zaidana, believed he was poisoned, died after a serious illness. Dr. Gonzalez, labeled a homicide. Dr. Lena Bolaños and Dr. Richard Field, gunmen in the house, both of them were murdered. And that's just some of them. Considering that holistic medicine is such a niche group, that's a very small group to have so many very strange deaths occur in them. Not very many coincidences happen like that. Only around our government.